The bull stopped in front of the girl in the wheelchair. Seconds later, everyone cried. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your like and comment where you're watching this video. From the Tamworth Agricultural Show had been a tradition in regional New South Wales for over 100 years. And Jack Riley had been showing his cattle there for the last 35. At 62, he'd seen every possible scenario play out in the show ring. Bulls that refused to move, bulls that charged the fence, bulls that performed perfectly and won championships. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for what was about to happen on this sweltering Saturday afternoon in January. His bull, Emperor, was a magnificent Charolais, cream-coloured with the massive frame and gentle temperament that had made him a champion 5 years running. At 7 years old, Emperor was in his prime, weighing nearly 1,000 kilograms of pure muscle and power. But what made Emperor truly special wasn't his size or his ribbons. It was his intelligence, his awareness, the way he seemed to understand not just commands, but intentions. The show ring was packed. Nearly 2,000 spectators filled the grandstands, seeking shade under wide-brimmed hats and umbrellas as the temperature pushed toward 40 degrees. This was the Grand Champion competition, the highlight of the 3-day show, and Emperor was the favorite to take home the top prize for the 6th consecutive year. Jack led Emperor through the gate and into the ring, the familiar sawdust crunching under his boots. The crowd applauded, recognizing the champion. Jack waved, then focused on the task at hand. The routine was simple. Walk the bull around the ring's perimeter, stop at designated points for the judges to examine, then exit. 5 minutes, maybe 10. Nothing complicated. They'd made it halfway around when Jack noticed the commotion in the stands. A family was making their way down the aisle, and at the center of the group was a little girl in a wheelchair. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, wearing a bright pink floral dress and a purple hat that was slightly too large for her head. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and even from a distance, Jack could see the excitement on her face. The family was clearly running late, trying to find their seats while the competition was already underway. The girl's father was pushing the wheelchair, her mother walking alongside, and what looked like grandparents following behind. They were causing a bit of disruption, people having to stand and shift to let them through. But nobody seemed annoyed. There was something about the girl's obvious joy that made the inconvenience worthwhile. Jack continued walking Emperor, keeping his attention on the bull and the judges, but Emperor had stopped. Not the normal pause at a designated point, but a complete, sudden stop in the middle of the ring. His massive head had turned toward the stands, toward the section where the family was still settling in. "Come on, boy," Jack said quietly, tugging gently on the lead. "Let's keep moving." But Emperor didn't move. The bull stood absolutely still, his attention fixed on something in the crowd. Jack followed his gaze and realized what had caught the bull's attention. The girl in the wheelchair. She'd seen Empress, and her face had transformed into pure wonder. She was pointing, saying something to her parents, her entire body vibrating with excitement. "Emperor," Jack said more firmly, "walk on." The bull took a step, but not forward, toward the fence, toward the section where the girl sat. Jack felt a flutter of concern. In all their years showing together, Emperor had never deviated from the routine, never refused a command, never acted unpredictably. The judges were watching now, making notes. Points would be deducted for lack of control, for failure to complete the prescribed pattern. "Emperor, no," Jack said, pulling back on the lead. But Emperor was moving with purpose now, his 800 kilograms of mass heading directly toward the fence that separated the ring from the spectator stands. Jack had no choice but to follow, his mind racing through options. He could force the bull back on course, but that would create a scene. He could remove Emperor from the ring entirely, which would mean forfeiting the competition, or he could let the bull do whatever he was intent on doing and hope it wouldn't be catastrophic. He chose option 3, largely because Emperor left him no other choice. The bull reached the fence and stopped directly in front of the section where the girl sat. She was in the second row, close enough that she could reach out and touch the rail if she leaned forward. Her parents had stopped settling in, frozen, clearly uncertain about having a 1,000-kilogram bull suddenly focusing all his attention on their daughter. Jack moved up beside Emperor, his hand on the bull's massive neck, ready to pull him away if needed. But Emperor's body language was calm, his ears were forward, his breathing steady. He wasn't agitated or aggressive, he was focused. The girl leaned forward in her wheelchair, her small hands gripping the armrests, her eyes locked on Emperor. "He's beautiful," she said, her voice carrying across the sudden quiet that had fallen over the ring. Emperor lowered his head. Jack had seen him do this before, usually when meeting children at farm visits. It was the bull's way of making himself less intimidating, of getting down to their level. But this was different. This was unprompted, spontaneous. The girl's mother put a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Maybe we should move back," she said nervously. "No, Mum, please," the girl said, her eyes never leaving Emperor. "Please let me stay." Jack made a decision that went against every safety protocol he'd ever been taught. "It's all right," he called up to the family. "Emperor's gentle as a lamb. He just wants to say hello." The judges were conferring. Security personnel were moving closer. The crowd had gone completely silent, 2,000 people watching this unscripted moment unfold. The girl reached out her hand, extending it toward the fence, toward Emperor. Her arm was thin, scarred with what looked like surgical marks. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the physical effort of holding it steady. Emperor moved his head closer to the fence, his massive muzzle reaching through the rails until it was inches from the girl's outstretched hand. "Can I touch him?" the girl asked, looking at Jack. "Yeah, love," Jack said, his voice tight with emotion he couldn't quite name. "You can touch him." The girl's small hand made contact with Emperor's muzzle, her fingers trembling as they touched the soft, velvety skin. Emperor stood perfectly still, as if he understood that this moment required absolute gentleness, absolute patience. Jack watched, hardly breathing, as the girl's face transformed. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, but she was smiling, really smiling, in a way that suggested she hadn't smiled like that in a very long time. "He's so soft," she whispered. "I didn't know bulls were soft." "His name's Emperor," Jack said gently. "He's 7 years old, and he's won more ribbons than I can count. But I reckon this moment right here is more important than all those ribbons combined." The girl's mother was crying now too, her hand over her mouth, her shoulders shaking. The father had his arm around his wife, his own eyes wet. Whatever story this family carried, whatever pain or struggle had brought them to this moment, Jack could see it written in their faces. "What's your name, love?" Jack asked the girl. "Emma," she said, her hand still resting on Emperor's muzzle. "Emma Harrison." "Well, Emma Harrison, Emperor here seems to think you're pretty special, and Emperor's a pretty good judge of character." Emma laughed, a sound of pure joy that rippled through the silent crowd. Someone in the stand started clapping, then someone else joined in. Within seconds, the entire grandstand was applauding, 2,000 people standing, giving this unplanned moment a standing ovation. Jack felt his own throat tighten. In 35 years of showing cattle, he'd never seen anything like this. The judges had stopped taking notes. Security had backed off. Even the announcer had gone silent, letting the moment speak for itself. "Emma," her father said gently, his voice thick with emotion, "we should probably let them finish the competition. Just one more minute," Emma pleaded. "Please, Dad." Emperor solved the problem by doing something Jack had never seen him do. The bull lowered himself further, his front legs bending until he was in what amounted to a bow, his massive head now level with Emma's wheelchair. The crowd gasped. Jack's heart nearly stopped. This wasn't a trained behavior. This wasn't something bulls did, but Emperor was doing it as naturally as if he'd practiced it 1,000 times. Emma's eyes went wide with wonder. "He's bowing to me," she said in amazement. "Mum, Dad, he's bowing to me." Her mother had completely broken down now, sobbing openly. Her father wrapped his arms around both his wife and daughter, tears running freely down his weathered face. Jack knelt down beside Emperor, his hand resting on the bull's shoulder, feeling the warmth of the animal's body, the steady rhythm of his breathing. In that moment, Jack understood something profound. Emperor hadn't stopped for attention or treats or to be difficult. He'd stopped because he recognized something in Emma. Pain, perhaps struggle, the weight of a burden too heavy for such small shoulders. And somehow, in that mysterious way that animals sometimes have, Emperor had decided that this girl needed him more than he needed another blue ribbon. After several minutes, Emma reluctantly pulled her hand back. "Thank you," she said to Emperor. "Thank you for stopping." Jack stood, preparing to lead Emperor away and complete the competition routine, even though he knew they'd lost any chance at the championship after this disruption. But the head judge, Margaret Sullivan, a woman who'd been judging cattle shows for 40 years, walked over to the fence. She looked at Emma, then at Emperor, then at Jack. "Mr. Riley," she said, her voice carrying across the quiet ring. "In all my years of judging livestock competitions, I've evaluated animals based on conformation, temperament, presentation. But I've never witnessed what I just saw. That bull demonstrated a level of emotional intelligence, gentleness, and awareness that transcends any judging criteria I've ever used." She turned to face the crowd, her voice amplified by the ring's sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, the grand champion of this year's Tamworth Agricultural Show is Emperor, owned by Jack Riley. Not for his physical attributes, though they're exceptional, but for reminding us that the true measure of an animal's worth isn't just in its breeding or conformation, it's in its heart." The crowd erupted. People were cheering, crying, embracing each other. Jack stood there overwhelmed as officials rushed forward with the champion's sash and rosette. But Jack wasn't looking at the judges or the ribbon. He was looking at Emma, whose face showed a happiness so pure it hurt to see. "Emma," Jack called up to her, "would you like to present Emperor with his ribbon?" The girl's eyes went impossibly wider. "Really, I can do that." "Course you can. Hang on a tick." Jack conferred quickly with show officials and Emma's parents. Within minutes, arrangements were made. Emma's father pushed her wheelchair down to ground level, and officials opened a gate to allow them into the ring. The crowd watched in absolute silence as Emma's father wheeled her across the sawdust to where Jack and Emperor stood. The bull remained calm, patient, as if he understood the significance of what was happening. Jack handed Emma the blue ribbon and champion's sash. "Would you do the honors?" he asked. With trembling hands, Emma draped the sash over Emperor's massive neck, then pinned the rosette to it. The bull stood motionless, accepting this honor with the same dignity he'd shown throughout the entire encounter. "You're the best bull in the whole world," Emma said, her small hand resting on Emperor's neck. "Thank you for being my friend." Emperor lowered his head again, gently touching his muzzle to Emma's lap, and that's when it happened. That's when everyone cried. Not just a few people, not just the emotional parents or the soft-hearted grandmothers. Everyone. Tough, sun-weathered farmers who'd spent their lives in the harsh Australian bush. Teenage boys who'd never admit to crying. Judges and officials and security guards, 2,000 people, united in this moment of pure, unexpected beauty. Jack's vision blurred with his own tears as he watched this little girl and his champion bull share a connection that transcended species, circumstance, everything that should have kept them separate. Later, after the official ceremonies, after the photographs and interviews, Emma's parents approached Jack. They were composed now, but their eyes were still red. "Mr. Riley," Emma's mother said, I need you to understand what just happened here. Emma was in a car accident 18 months ago. She lost the use of her legs. But worse than that, she lost her spirit. She stopped smiling, stopped engaging with life. We've tried everything. Therapy, counseling, support groups. Nothing reached her. She paused, wiping her eyes, until today. Until your bull stopped and saw her. Really saw her. For the first time since the accident, she's alive again. Jack felt his throat close up hearing these words. He looked over at Emma, who was still sitting near Emperor, her hand resting on the bull's front leg, talking to him in that soft, animated way children talk to animals they love. I don't know what to say, Jack managed. Emperor's always been special, but I've never seen him do anything like this. It was like he knew, like he understood exactly what she needed. Emma's father stepped forward, extending his hand. I'm David Harrison. This is my wife, Christine. We live in Armadale, about 2 hours from here. Emma hasn't wanted to go anywhere since the accident. She's terrified of crowds, of being seen, of people staring at her wheelchair. But she begged us to bring her to the agricultural show, said she wanted to see the animals. We thought it would be good for her, but we never imagined anything like this. Emperor changed her life today, Christine added. I know that sounds dramatic, but I can see it in her eyes. She's back. Our daughter is back. Jack watched Emperor with Emma, the massive bull standing perfectly still while the little girl stroked his neck and chattered away. An idea was forming in his mind, something that felt both completely natural and slightly crazy. Would you lot be interested in visiting the farm? Jack asked. Emperor lives on a property about 30 minutes outside Tamworth. We've got other animals too, horses, sheep, dogs. Emma's welcome any time. And I reckon Emperor would be pleased to see her again. Christine's hand flew to her mouth, fresh tears spilling over. Are you serious? Wouldn't offer if I wasn't. Look at them. They've got a connection. Who am I to break that up? David pulled out his phone, fingers already moving. Can I get your number? We'll sort something out for next weekend if that works. They exchanged details, and Jack gave them specific directions to his property. As they spoke, a journalist from the local newspaper approached, asking for permission to photograph Emma with Emperor and to interview the family about what had happened. The story ran in the Tamworth paper the following Monday, complete with a photo of Emma with her hand on Emperor's muzzle, both of them looking at each other with obvious affection. By Wednesday, it had been picked up by state media. By Friday, it was national news. Jack's phone didn't stop ringing. Requests for interviews, invitations to appear on morning television shows, messages from families with disabled children asking if they could also visit. It was overwhelming, but Jack handled it the same way he handled everything, with practical Australian pragmatism. He set up visiting days on his farm, inviting families with children who had disabilities or were facing medical challenges. He created a safe space where kids could interact with Emperor and the other animals, and he never charged a cent. The first official visit was Emma's, as promised. David and Christine brought her the following Saturday, and the moment they turned into Jack's driveway, Emma started bouncing in her wheelchair with excitement. Is that where Emperor lives? She asked, pointing at the sprawling property with its neat fences and well-maintained barns. That's the place, love, David confirmed. Jack was waiting at the gate, and beside him, already seeming to anticipate who was coming, stood Emperor. The bull had his head up, ears forward, watching the car approach. When Emma's father lifted her from the car and into her wheelchair, Emperor made a sound Jack had never heard him make before, a soft, almost welcoming rumble that resonated from deep in his chest. He remembers me, Emma said, her voice filled with wonder. Mum, Dad, he remembers me. Jack opened the gate and let them into the paddock where Emperor was kept. It was a large, grassy area with shade trees and a small dam, safe and secure. Emperor walked straight to Emma, bypassing Jack entirely, and lowered his head to her level. Emma threw her arms around the bull's massive neck, and Emperor stood perfectly still, accepting this affection with the patience of a saint. "I missed you," Emma said into Emperor's neck. "I told everyone about you. My teachers, my doctors, everyone. They all think you're amazing." Over the next few months, Emma became a regular visitor to Jack's farm. Every Saturday morning, weather permitting, David and Christine would make the drive from Armadale. Sometimes Emma's grandparents came too, sitting in folding chairs in the shade, watching their granddaughter interact with Emperor with expressions of joy and gratitude. Jack noticed something extraordinary happening. Emma was changing. Not just emotionally, though that transformation was obvious, she was changing physically. Her doctors had said the paralysis was permanent, that she'd never regain function in her legs. But Emma started reporting sensations, tingles, warmth, small movements that shouldn't have been possible. Her physiotherapist was baffled. In monthly assessments, Emma was showing improvement that had no medical explanation. Nerve function that had been completely dead was showing activity. Muscles that should have atrophied were maintaining tone. "It's the bull," Emma insisted. "When I'm with Emperor, I can feel my legs, like they're waking up." The medical professionals were skeptical, attributing any improvement to the natural healing process or misdiagnosis of the original injury. But Christine and David knew better. They saw what happened when Emma was with Emperor. They saw the way her entire body seemed to come alive in the bull's presence. 6 months after that day at the agricultural show, Emma took her first step. Not a full step, not unaided, but with the support of parallel bars and her physiotherapist. She moved her right leg forward, then her left. It was barely perceptible, more of a shuffle than a step, but it was movement. Intentional, controlled movement. The first thing Emma said after accomplishing this feat was, "I have to tell Emperor that Saturday, when they arrived at the farm, Emma insisted on showing Emperor what she could do." With her father's support on one side and her physiotherapist, who'd driven out specially, on the other sea, Emma stood up from her wheelchair. Emperor watched intently as Emma took 3 shuffling steps toward him. The bull stood absolutely still, as if understanding that any movement on his part might disrupt Emma's concentration. When she reached him, exhausted from the effort, Emperor lowered his head, and Emma wrapped her arms around his neck, crying tears of joy and accomplishment. "I did it," she told him. "I walked because of you. You made me believe I could." Jack, watching from a distance, found himself wiping away tears again. He'd raised cattle his entire life, had worked with hundreds of animals, but Emperor was different. Emperor had a gift, an awareness that transcended normal animal behavior. News of Emma's progress spread, and soon Jack's farm was hosting regular visits from children with various disabilities and medical conditions. Emperor seemed to have an infinite capacity for patience and gentleness. He would stand for hours, letting children touch him, talk to him, share their fears and hopes with him. A year after that momentous day at the Tamworth Agricultural Show, Jack stood in the same show ring with Emperor. They'd been invited back as special guests to commemorate what had become known as the moment in local agricultural circles. The story of Emperor and Emma had touched hearts across Australia and beyond, becoming a symbol of hope and unexpected healing. But this year's appearance would be different. This year, Emma would be there too, not in the stands, but in the ring itself. Jack watched as Emma's family arrived, parking in the special area reserved for them. But when David opened the car door, Emma didn't wait for her wheelchair. Instead, using forearm crutches and moving slowly but deliberately, she actually walked across the gravel car park toward the entrance. Jack felt his eyes burning with tears for what must have been the 100th time since meeting this extraordinary girl. Emma's progress over the past year had been nothing short of miraculous. Her doctors used words like unprecedented and remarkable recovery. Her physiotherapist called it the most significant improvement she'd witnessed in 20 years of practice. But Emma had a simpler explanation. Emperor gave me hope, and hope is the best medicine. The crowd in the stands was enormous today, easily 3,000 people, many of them having traveled specifically to witness the reunion. When Jack led Emperor into the ring, the applause was immediate and thunderous. The bull, now 8 years old and still magnificent, walked with his usual dignified calm. Then the announcer's voice rang out, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Emma Harrison." Emma appeared at the gate, supported by her crutches, but walking entirely under her own power. She was wearing the same pink floral dress she'd worn a year ago, though she'd grown enough that it was now a bit short. Her blonde hair was still in a ponytail, and her smile was bright enough to light up the entire showground. The crowd erupted. People weren't just clapping, they were standing, cheering, many of them crying. This wasn't just about a girl learning to walk again. It was about the power of connection, the healing that can happen when two souls recognize each other across the boundaries that normally separate us. Emperor's reaction was immediate. The bull's head came up, his ears forward, and he made that same soft rumbling sound he'd made the first time he saw Emma at Jack's farm. He started walking toward her, not rushing, but moving with clear purpose. Jack let the lead rope go slack, allowing Emperor to go to Emma. The bull stopped directly in front of her, lowering his massive head to her level, and Emma dropped one of her crutches to wrap her free arm around his neck. "I walked for you," she said, her voice amplified by the microphone the show organizers had given her. "I walked because you showed me that anything is possible. That even when everyone says something can't happen, sometimes it does anyway." The crowd had gone completely silent, everyone straining to hear Emma's words. "A year ago, I thought my life was over," Emma continued, her voice stronger now. "I thought being in a wheelchair meant I'd never be happy again. Never do the things I used to do, never be the person I was before the accident. But then Emperor stopped. Right here in this ring, he stopped and looked at me. And somehow he made me understand that I wasn't broken. I was just different, and different isn't the same as less." Christine was sobbing in the front row, David's arm around her, both parents overwhelmed by seeing their daughter not just walking, but speaking with such confidence and insight. "Emperor taught me that healing isn't always about getting back to who you were before," Emma said. "Sometimes it's about finding out who you can become. And with the right help, the right support, the right friend, you can become someone even stronger than you were before." She turned to face the crowd directly. "I'm not completely healed. The doctors say I might never walk without assistance. I might always need crutches or braces, but that's okay. Because Emperor taught me that strength isn't about doing things perfectly. It's about doing them anyway, even when they're hard, even when people say you can't." The crowd's applause was deafening. Jack stood back, letting Emma have her moment, his chest tight with pride. Not just pride in Emperor, though that was certainly there, but pride in this remarkable girl who'd taken the gift the bull had given her and turned it into something even more profound. After the speeches, after the photographs and interviews, after the crowd had dispersed, Jack, Emma, and Emperor had a quiet moment together in the ring. Emma's parents waited respectfully at a distance, giving them privacy. "Jack," Emma said, her hand resting on Emperor's shoulder, "I want to ask you something. Anything, love. When I'm older, when I finish school, would you teach me how to work with animals like Emperor? I want to help other kids the way he helped me. I want to create a place where children who are struggling can come and find hope." Jack felt his throat close up again. This girl, who'd been so broken a year ago, was already thinking about how to use her experience to help others. "Emma Harrison. I'd be honored, and I reckon Emperor would be pretty pleased about it too." The bull made that soft rumbling sound again, as if agreeing. Over the following years, Jack's farm transformed into something much bigger than a simple cattle property. With support from donations and grants, it became the Emperor's Hope Center, a registered charity providing animal-assisted therapy for children with disabilities and medical challenges. Emma, true to her word, became involved in the center's operations as soon as she was old enough, eventually studying animal science and therapeutic intervention at university. She still walked with a slight limp, still used a cane on difficult days, but she walked, and more importantly, she helped others find their own path to healing. Emperor lived to be 14, an exceptionally old age for a bull. He spent his final years at the center, gentle and patient with every child who came to visit, each one receiving the same gift of attention and awareness that he'd given Emma that day at the show. When Emperor finally passed, peacefully in his sleep in the paddock he loved, the entire community mourned. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he'd touched. Emma, now 21 years old and walking without assistance on that particular day, gave the eulogy. Emperor was just a bull, she said, her voice steady despite her tears. Just an animal, doing what animals do. Except he wasn't. He was a teacher, a healer, a friend who saw past the wheelchair, past the disability, past everything that made me feel less than whole, and recognized something in me that I'd forgotten was there. My strengths, my worth, my future. She paused, looking at the crowd of people whose lives had been changed by this remarkable animal. Everyone asked me what happened that day at the show. Why did Emperor stop? What made him single me out? And the truth is, I don't know. Maybe he sensed my pain. Maybe he recognized a kindred spirit, since he'd been hurt too, rescued from a bad situation when he was young. Or maybe it was just chance, just a random moment that happened to change everything. But I prefer to think it was something else, something deeper. That Emperor stopped because he understood something fundamental about life. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply see another being, really see them, acknowledge their existence, their struggle, their worth, and in that acknowledgement, give them permission to hope again. Emperor stopped in front of a girl in a wheelchair, and seconds later, everyone cried. But those tears weren't just sadness or sympathy. They were recognition that we'd all witnessed something profound, a reminder that healing can come from the most unexpected places. That connection transcends species, circumstance, everything we think divides us, and that sometimes, just sometimes, hope has 4 legs, weighs 1,000 kilograms, and knows exactly when to stop. The crowd stood in silence for a long moment after Emma finished speaking, then began to applaud. Not the wild, enthusiastic applause of celebration, but the deep, sustained applause of gratitude and recognition. Emperor was buried on the property, in the paddock where he'd spent his happiest years, under the shade of the same tree where Emma had taken her first steps. His grave was marked with a simple stone that read, Emperor, champion bull, healer of hearts, teacher of hope. He stopped when it mattered most. The center continued to operate, growing to serve hundreds of children each year. Emma eventually became its director, carrying on Emperor's legacy of healing through connection. And in the main building, prominently displayed in the entrance where every visitor would see it, was the photograph from that day at the Tamworth Agricultural Show. A little girl in a wheelchair, her hand outstretched. A massive white bull, his head lowered in gentleness. And between them, a moment of pure, unexpected grace that reminded everyone who saw it that sometimes the most powerful healing comes not from medicine or therapy or technology, but from one soul recognizing another and saying, simply, I see you, you matter, you're not alone. That was Emperor's gift, that was his legacy, and it lived on long after he was gone, in every child who came to the center, in every life that was touched by his story, in every person who learned that healing can wear the most unexpected faces.